This video contains spoilers for Steins Gate, so if you haven't watched the show, please do that beforehand. Otherwise, please enjoy the video. Insanity can be defined as repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. This definition is often attributed to Albert Einstein and has become a staple when it comes to portraying insanity in modern television and media in general. Most of us have played something similar to an RPG where we spent hours upon hours grinding for something, but that wasn't insanity. We knew that there was an outcome and that there would be an end, but imagine repeating the same day for multiple years worth of time without an end in sight, having to watch one of your closest of friends die in every way imaginable right in front of you without a semblance of a solution. This is what Okabe Rintarou had to go through. Steins Gate has a story that takes place over the course of 3 weeks, yet we get to see Okabe, our main protagonist, experience years upon years worth of torture, yet still live through it, achieving his deserved happiness in the end. Okabe's put through more challenges than a single person could even think to handle, but he doesn't lose all sensibility. Yes, he's seen to lose his mind over time, but the extent is tame when compared to the cause of it all. He goes through everything there is to go through when it comes to time travel, but is able to smile once it's all over. Okabe has to experience the death of his friend a seemingly infinite amount of times. He has to be the one to choose whether a certain person gets to live over the other, or whether one person's wish is more valuable than the other. He gets to fall in love and watch that entire relationship be wiped away, and throughout all of this, he can't share his pain with anyone around him regardless of whether or not he trusts them, because time is too scarce to waste on something as valueless as his own mental health, especially when compared to all of his other priorities. These events and decisions that he has to make are all used as ways to develop Okabe in one of the greatest ways in anime history. Mayuri's death loop, despite not being the first traumatic thing to happen, is what I want to talk about first because it's one of the most important events within the story that contributed to Okabe's fall. Okabe repeated the same day over and over again. It may not have been 24 whole hours, but the amount of time that he's hit restart can be considered daunting. Every single time that he went back, Mayuri's death would be marked by her pocket watch freezing. Every time this happened, Okabe had to come to terms with the fact that he could do nothing for one of the people he loves the most. He had to simply watch her die in a new way every time, showing him how useless his efforts were. His experience when it came to the repetition of Mayuri's death was something traumatic in and of itself, but what furthered the pain caused by it was the looming sense of defeat, present throughout the entire ordeal. His awareness of how little options he had only resulted in more weight added to his back. He knew there was no real way out of this loop, yet he kept trying over and over again, expecting a different result. Okabe repeated that day so many times that he started to question his own humanity, which is one of the first major signs we see of his mental state deteriorate. He's seen Mayuri die so many times that he's almost acknowledged it as a fact of this world. He still struggles because he knows he should, but he eventually starts believing that he can always go back in time if Mayuri does die on that given day. He almost believes that her death has become just another thing in his everyday life. His being accustomed to this is what points towards insanity, but him pointing it out about himself in disgust is what brings it all back together. He's aware of how terrible of a position he's in, which shows that he hasn't lost everything yet, but the fact that the death of someone close to him was normalized also shows aspects of insanity. Any normal person would have been in a state far worse, in the sense that most people wouldn't have continued. They would have moved on living with the fact that they could do nothing. Either that, or they'd enter a state of psychosis, detaching from reality because of how mentally straining it all is. They say there's a fine line between any two things, and Okabe was walking a jagged path along that line. He never felt a psychosis, but he came so close to giving up, having actually done so in Zero. He'd seen it for himself that he's the cause of it all. He's the one that causes his pain because he's the one that stabs Makise and started this loop of time travel. His giving up at that moment seemed more natural than breathing itself, but even that was crucial for his success in the end. Okabe didn't cause pain exclusively for himself though. Using the phone microwave, the Future Gadget Lab sent back many D-mails for not only testing purposes but also as a way to make the lives of their friends easier. Little did they know these D-mails would come back to bite them in the ass later in the show. Each D-mail had a person's regrets engraved into them: Ruka's insecurity about his gender, Fairus' guilt regarding her father's death, stopping Suzuha from leaving, and, last but certainly not least, the prevention of Makise Kurisu's death. Okabe had to revert the emails sent in relation to all of these topics in order to stop the unending loop of Mayuri's death. As Okabe goes farther back in time reverting these emails, he has to weigh what he's taking from his friends against Mayuri's life. He's forced to put a value on all of his closest friends' desires, living with the fact that he was the one that stripped them of this happiness. It may not seem to be that hard of a choice when choosing between things such as Ruka's gender or Suzuha's finding her dad in comparison to Mayuri's life, but he had to choose between the life of Ferris's father and Mayuri's. He may not have known Ferris's father, but a life is a life. Okabe consciously chose that a certain life was worth more than another, which puts a strain on his sense of humanity. The final demail he had to revert was likely the one that destroyed him the most mentally. Okabe was forced to choose between the life of the person he loves, Makise Kurisu, and the life of the person he'd spent most of his childhood growing up with, Shina Mayuri. Makise was the person that Okabe related to and loved the most. Despite bickering and arguing with her, he cared for her and admired her. This entire journey began because her life was spared. As he did with the others, he told Makise about the reversal as a sign of respect. At that moment, when he spoke to Makise, Okabe had to make a choice that had no right answer. He had to choose between saving the world and Mayuri, or giving up right then and there, enjoying the company of someone he loved. Okabe may have chosen between people's lives in the past, but that was different because those people were meant to be dead. Those people died for a reason, but Makise was someone that died because of the time machine. She was a victim and one that Okabe loved. His choosing between her and Mayuri is him having to choose between two people that are both innocent casualties in the grand scheme of things. Making this decision was likely the point that Okabe broke, the moment that all of his pent-up frustrations came out and he knew that all of his decisions had been wrong. He knew at that moment the phone microwave itself was the worst thing to happen to him. This was the moment he knew that nothing he did would bring about his happiness, but he had to go through with it regardless because it was the only thing left to do. He chose the survival of the world and Mayuri's life over his own mental stability and happiness. This was the moment that Okabe broke, and the aftermath is one that only gets worse. From Okabe's perspective, he'd done away with so many of his friends' ambitions and desires that this was just his punishment. He had to give up what he loved most, just like the others, so that he could achieve his goal of saving Mayuri and returning back to the Alpha timeline. Although the decision-making process itself was taxing on Okabe, losing Makise as well as all of the memories made within these 3 weeks was one of the most devastating things to happen to him, because at least when he went back in time previously, he had a checkpoint. He had a point in time where he'd at least established these relationships, but this was different. He was going all the way back to the start, and he would be the only one to remember these few weeks spent together without any idea of a way to befriend all of these unique people once more. As Okabe continued to travel through time, experiencing many different world lines, he makes memories with every single one of his friends that they don't remember because, unlike him, they don't retain memories every time the world line shifts. He lives with countless encounters worth of memories, of which the people he experiences with will never know of. At first, this doesn't bother him because it's only a few conversations, only a few interactions, and only a few remarks. But these minuscule conversations grow into entire relationships and events disappearing. Traveling between these different timelines, not knowing what has and hasn't happened, Okabe is seen to mix up his memories. He reaches a point where he has no clue what has happened in any of the timelines he's going into, which takes a toll on him mentally. Precious memories that he'd shared with his friends had been erased, and he'd been left behind as the only one with any recollection of them. Although it may be devastating to have some of your most cherished memories erased into nothing, Okabe lost entire relationships all because of a cursed microwave. But these events are just some of the countless ways that Steins Gate portrayed Okabe's descent into madness. Steins Gate 0, on the other hand, portrays the lowest point for Okabe mentally. Okabe is no longer descending into madness, rather he's hit rock bottom with nothing to lead him back up. In 0, he goes as far as putting it all behind him, finally taking off the lab coat and seizing any Chunibyo-related actions. To add on to his overall personality changing, as the story progresses, his facial expressions and gestures slowly but surely turn to grimace. His posture worsens and his overall appearance became darker. Nearing the end of the first season, his pain could even be seen in his eyes. They were those of someone who'd been to hell and back, yet he treaded forward as though there was only one way to go. He moved forward disregarding the fact that he could turn back, which served to exemplify his conviction. The Okabe of Season 1 was a mess, but his character in Steins Gate 0 was far, far worse. Zero portrayed the shell of a character. It displayed a character that had lost everything with no foreseeable way of salvaging any of it. Okabe's character in Zero felt similar to a foil when compared to Okabe of episode 1 because he wasn't over the top. He could no longer smile and he couldn't appreciate what he did have because he was too busy thinking about what he'd thrown away. Okabe's personality didn't drastically change because the author decided to mess up his character, but rather because Steins Gate Zero is a depiction of what would have been had Makise stayed dead. It's a depiction of what Okabe would have become if he hesitated even a little throughout those 3 weeks of anguish, so it serves as a good example of how much he had to bear over the course of the series. The fact that this contrast is so large yet plausible goes to show just how much Okabe endured to return to the Alpha timeline, achieving the denouement that he deserves. Okabe's character is one of the most well-written ones in anime. He may not have been a representation of divinity in the gospel, but he was a representation of something much simpler yet complicated in its own right. His character was a representation of depression, loss, insecurity, and stress. His character was insanity. It was a definition of insanity and it did it beautifully. And that insanity is why Okabe is a character to be praised as well as exemplified for the ways it represents something so seemingly simple. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment.